So far, we're far from it. So we've seen 3 deals that are of interest for grains and oilseeds. So the US-UK deal, the US-Vietnam, and the US-Indonesia deals. We've heard since that Rubio's been mentioning that there's been some very constructive talks with China, but again, nothing constructive. So for the moment, it's more a failure set than a success story. In parallel, we've seen some deals outside of the US. So, for example, we've seen China within the BRICS talking about looking at replacing the US dollar. In particular, we've seen the Chinese and the Egyptians talking about settlements in their own currency. We've seen some deals between the EU and Canada. We've seen some deals between the UK and India. So overall, the US are struggling to get new deals. The rest of the world is trying to manage the US difficulties by creating their own. It is interesting also in terms of the next big clash. We've got the EU and the US talking about negotiations. The US came in strong by saying it's a 30% tariff percentage, and the EU said that they will give themselves time up to the 1st of August, and if nothing happens, there might be some retaliatory consequences. For Trump, the difficulty is that the tariffs are starting to hit home. We had the June 25 CPI data, which showed an increase, which means that there is some evidence that the tariffs are going into the end consumers, and that seems to indicate that the Fed is less likely to raise interest rates at this stage. And if it is the case, that it might support the dollar in the short term. And this is something we've seen yesterday, and it is interesting for us in grains and oilseeds because it allowed Paris to have a bounce on the weaker euro, and it is also being mentioned in terms of ruble to find out if Russia is going to be able to export more favorably. So at present, we've got 2 more geopolitical elements that we've been paying attention to. The first one being the recent attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. So it is interesting for us because it is causing the premiums, the insurance premiums, to go up, and also it is adding to extra cost to the route where fertilizers are going through. Then the second element is obviously Ukraine-Russia. We've seen Trump saying that he's fed up with Putin once again, and he has clearly stated that he's going to allow the sale of weapons to the EU for the EU to donate to the Ukraine. So this war is not coming to a close anytime soon. Also, the US will impose a 100% tariff on Russian goods over the next, once the next 50 days are over. So there's a kind of ultimatum to Russia saying you've got 50 days to get to a peace deal, otherwise we'll impose some tariffs. So it's nothing new. The war's been going on for about 3 years. The industry has been very versatile, has adapted. But what is interesting at this stage is the fact that it is impacting the ruble. The ruble had been very strong against the US dollar or against the Chinese currency of late. And if we start to see some tariffs and so on, it may impact the ruble, and that's going to have an impact on how easily or in a more difficult manner the Russians will be able to export new crop wheat, for example. So the situation in the European Union for maize is still about the same. So there's been some light rain over the past week. There's some light rain in the forecast, but generally speaking, it has remained hot and dry, and it is a difficulty for maize in Europe. Now, what is interesting is that we went to Lorraine over the past 4 days. I put my boots on the ground, and I saw very much a disparity between those fields which are irrigated and those which are not. The fields which are irrigated looked wonderful, taller than I am. The fields which were not irrigated were quite short, about waist level. So obviously it is depending on rain levels, and so far what we've seen from analysts is a very different type of range of estimates. So we've got Copa Cogeca, for example, looking at a 62.6 million ton crop in Europe. We've got Strategica, which is at 57.4. So it's a wide range of estimates, and we're going to have to watch out from that point of view. In terms of crop conditions, Agrimer puts out some figures every week. They are 75% good to excellent in France. We've lost basically 10% in ratings from the start of June. We've lost another 3 from last week. It's still high, but we are losing percentages of good to excellent ratings every single week. In terms of chart, Euronext Paris Maize has been very much trying to test the upper Bollinger Band. It's been testing the overbought level, and it has attracted some specs to the maize board who were thinking to buy maize, sell wheat, and they realized that maize is already very high. So in that sense, we discourage them from entering the maize market to buy, because the arbitrage is already very tight. So the rest of the world is very different to Europe. We've got a harvest which is still ongoing in Argentina. We're about 3/4 of the crop harvested. In Brazil, we've got a crop which is nearing the halfway mark in terms of harvest, so it is progressing quite well. And in the US, the crop conditions remain very ideal, very good. So we had a USDA report on Monday showing 74% of the crop is rated good to excellent, same as last week, and it's up some 9% above the 5-year average. So that crop is doing pretty well so far. Now, what has been interesting is that we've seen over the past week September contract Chicago making new lows once again, but we've had a bit of a bounce, and that bounce has been off the currency today because the dollar is slightly weakening, but also we've heard some comments from our US analysts which have been picked up by quite a few people stating that some farmers in the US, especially in the southern Midwest, are talking of some risk for pollination. So we don't know yet if it's wide-ranged or not, but we're going to keep an eye on it because the USDA has got a 181 bushel per acre estimate. If we start to see pollination issues, then it might challenge that 181 figure. So it is something definitely worth noting and paying attention to. So again, the reason why we had some pressure on soybean over the past week is basically on the back of the Monday USDA update on crop conditions in the US. The crop conditions for soybean came at 70% good to excellent. That's 4% better than the previous week. It's some 7% better than the 5-year average. And in a way, the trade had warned us that it would be likely to happen. The weather had been good for corn, and soybean had remained at 66% good to excellent for the past 2 weeks, and the trade was saying it would be natural for those conditions to improve, and it is what has happened. Elsewhere, the Argentina is still talking of a large crop, some 50.2 million tons. And for Brazil, for the new crop, a crop that is not yet planted, we're starting to get some really large initial estimates, which we need to take with a pinch of salt because the crop is not yet in the ground. But the area, according to Safras, could be 1.2% higher than the previous year. And also, we could have an estimate that's close to 80 million tons. So Safras has put 79.88 million tons, which is a huge figure. It would be a new record as well. Now, that's the bearish part of soybean, but we also have had some bullish element which allowed soybean to rally a little bit, especially this morning, and it comes from the demand side. So we've had some reports out of China saying that the June imports were over 12.2 million tons. That's a record for June. Also, the Brazilians have exported some 13.4 million tons of soybean in June. For July, we're counting some 12.2 million tons. So some big figures of imports and exports, which means that demand is there. And when we look at the US, the domestic demand figures are there as well. So we had a June NOPA figure that came out on the 15th, so yesterday, that was showing a record crush for June in the US, showing that there is domestic demand. And that was also confirmed by the USDA report for last Friday, the WASDE report, that was showing a soy oil to biofuel at some 15.5 billion pounds, which again would be a record if realized. So we have demand that is being shown in those figures. So rapeseed is nearing its end of harvest. As I mentioned earlier on, I put my boots in the ground in my native Lorraine, and going through the fields, I could barely find a dozen rapeseed fields that were not yet harvested, so that harvest is almost finished. The French Agricultural Ministry is saying that the crop should be around 4.2 million tons, some 8% better than last year. So far we hear from farmers and farming groups that the oil content is pretty good in France, some over 45% oil content. And when we look at Europe, we have some mixed estimates of production. We had Copa-Cogeca at about 18.9 million tons, which is very much on the low side of other estimates we've seen. Most people we talk to tend to think it's going to be a 20 million ton plus mark, with the most optimistic people at 21. For the rest of the world, we have had some noise once again that Australia is dry, but there's been one big element this morning. Australia is sending 5 trial ships to China for canola. That's going to be very interesting, because if China buys Australian canola, they might look for less Ukrainian rapeseed, and that might make the opportunity for Europe to secure more Ukrainian rapeseed. And on the Ukrainian side, we've seen estimates that are very much consolidating the view, with saying at 3.25 million tons, with UGA at 3 million tons, and we've seen another analyst at 2.9 million tons, and everyone tending to think that the exports will be around the 2.5, 2.6 million ton mark. So very much a consensus there. So the difficulty for the bulls at present is that the harvest is in full swing. Whether it's in the US, in Europe, in the Black Sea, the harvest is ongoing. When I was in France this past week, I saw some wonderful barley and wheat fields being harvested. The quality is good, the specific weights are high, protein contents are satisfactory. Generally speaking, the market is looking at a nice crop in Europe, nice crop in the US, and then some question marks in the Black Sea region, but we'll have to try to find more information. Now for the US, the crop is about 2/3 harvested so far. The conditions are stable. They've actually improved in spring wheat. And when we look at the rest of the world, we see that there's some dryness concerns still in parts of Canada and Australia. But for example, Argentina is over 90% planted. So overall, it's going well. Having said that, there are elements which have been questionable over the past week. For example, when we looked at the WASDE report from last Friday, the USDA did not change the China figure of 142 million tons. Some find it surprising, especially after the June heat that has been a concern. And we had the Chinese Statistic Bureau coming in at 138.1 million tons. So it's a difference of 4 million tons. It's going to be important at some point. Then the last bit that is really important for us at present is finding out what's going on with Russia. So we've had very mixed messages once again from Russia. We've seen ICAR reducing the production estimate from 84.5 million tons to 84. Sovecon remains around the 83 mark. And the feedback we've heard from the market is that early yields are disappointing, and we still hear that there's little harvested wheat going to the ports. So while Russia is struggling to get to the ports, we've seen reports from Bulgaria or Romania saying that their domestic FOB prices are going up because the demand is coming to them. The interesting element as well is that Russia is trying to force or encourage its farmers to sell. And for the past 2 weeks, we've had no export tax from Russia. And the export estimates are slightly improving for July. So Sovecon is looking at 2.4 million tons. That's better than the 1.2 last month, but it's way lower than the 3.6 estimated last year. So the Agricultural Ministry is trying to find solutions, find incentives for farmers to bring their wheat to market, but for the moment it's tentative. And as I was mentioning earlier on at the beginning of our recording, we've had this CPI data in the US that rallied the dollar yesterday. It is potentially allowing the ruble to come off. If it did, then it could become important for farmers in Russia who would want to potentially export their wheat if the ruble allows. Now, we've had another element yesterday in wheat that was very important. On the demand side, Algeria came in to buy over 1 million tons of wheat. So it is creating demand, and people are therefore looking at that balance between a big coming crop and whether or not we're starting a demand cycle, especially from international tenderers. In terms of Paris, it's becoming interesting also from a euro point of view. We've been mentioning that the DEC 25 euro dollar had risen to 119.51 as a high. Yesterday we went back down to 117.11. As we speak, we were around the 117.30 mark. It has allowed Paris to bounce a little bit yesterday, and with Chicago bouncing today, that rally is consolidating. And it's coming at a time when, we've mentioned it in the past, the funds are really short. So they're short some 75,000 lots, or I should say the specs are short 75,000 lots in Chicago. They're short 253,000 lots in Paris. The funds are short some 280,000+ lots. And so the funds have got to roll their position. By the 15th of August, the September contract in Paris would come to expiry in terms of options. So from now to the 15th of August, we expect the roll to take place. The September-December spread is starting to rally. It's trading minus 850. But more importantly, we've seen over the past 3-4 days some evidence that the roll is starting through the open interest. The September open interest has gone down by about 14,000 lots. The December contract has gone up by about 13,000 lots. So for us, those elements of Russian uncertainty, ruble potential movement, euro movement, and the roll timing to take place indicates that maybe the bulls will have some sort of a rally that they've been talking about for quite some time.